The cruelest mistakes are never made with closed eyes, they are made with open eyes that refuse to see. The silence inside the Castelliano estate felt heavier than the marble columns holding up its towering ceilings. Afternoon sunlight spilled through floor-to-ceiling windows, turning polished walnut floors into sheets of gold, but no warmth reached the library where William Castelliano stood behind his mahogany desk. At 38, the man whose name carried quiet authority throughout Chicago rarely raised his voice. He never needed to. Every employee understood that when William spoke softly, decisions became permanent. Naomi Carter stood a few feet away in her plain navy housekeeping uniform, her dark curls tied neatly beneath a simple scarf, both hands gently holding a worn leather notebook against her chest. She had worked in the mansion for 11 months without a single complaint. She arrived before sunrise, left long after sunset, spoke only when spoken to, and somehow managed to make herself almost invisible inside one of the largest homes in the city. Yet today every pair of eyes in the room rested on her. The head housekeeper looked disappointed. The estate manager appeared almost satisfied. 2 members of the household staff avoided looking at Naomi altogether. On William's desk lay several printed security photos. In every one of them, Naomi appeared somewhere in the background with the same notebook open in her hands. Sometimes she was writing near the kitchen. Sometimes outside the greenhouse. Sometimes sitting quietly during her lunch break beneath the old oak tree overlooking the lake. William picked up one photograph without changing his expression. "You carry this notebook everywhere?" Naomi nodded once. "Yes, sir." "And you write in it every day?" "Yes, sir." His blue eyes remained calm, but there was unmistakable disappointment beneath them. "This house depends on discretion. Everyone who works here understands that." Naomi lowered her eyes without speaking. The silence stretched until even the grandfather clock seemed reluctant to interrupt it. William finally exhaled. "I cannot keep someone in my home if I believe private matters are being documented." Naomi's fingers tightened around the notebook. She looked as though she wanted to explain something, yet the words never came. Instead, she quietly asked, "Have you read it?" William frowned slightly. "I shouldn't have to." Another silence settled over the room, heavier than the last. Outside, rain clouds drifted across the afternoon sky, dimming the golden light pouring through the windows. Naomi slowly nodded, accepting an answer she had expected long before this day arrived. William reached into a drawer and removed an envelope containing her final paycheck. He placed it gently on the desk instead of sliding it toward her. Even in dismissal, he believed dignity mattered. "Your employment ends today," he said. "Security will arrange transportation if you need it." Naomi stepped forward, accepted the envelope with both hands, and whispered, "Thank you for giving me the chance to work here." No anger. No pleading. No tears. Her quiet gratitude unsettled several people in the room far more than an argument ever could. She turned toward the door, then paused with one hand resting on the brass handle. Without facing anyone, she spoke almost in a whisper. "Sir," William looked up. "Please, whatever you decide, don't throw away my notebook." The request sounded strangely personal, almost protective. William glanced at the weathered leather cover resting beneath her arm. "If it contains nothing inappropriate, you have nothing to worry about." Naomi slowly shook her head. "It isn't about me." Before William could ask what she meant, she placed the notebook carefully on the corner of his desk. "Then keep it," she said softly. "Maybe one day, you'll understand why I wrote every single page." She offered one final respectful nod before walking through the library doors. Her footsteps faded into the enormous hallway until only silence remained. No one spoke. The room felt strangely emptier than it had only moments before. William stared at the forgotten notebook. Its faded leather corners were worn smooth from years of careful use, and a thin blue ribbon marked a page somewhere near the middle. He reached toward it, then stopped. Whatever answers lay inside could wait until morning. At least, that was what he believed. He had no way of knowing that before another sunrise arrived, that ordinary notebook would force him to question not only the decision he had made that afternoon, but every judgment he had ever trusted about the people standing quietly in front of him. The rain finally arrived just after sunset, washing the long driveway in silver reflections as Naomi Carter walked through the estate gates carrying nothing except a small overnight bag. She never looked back. Inside the mansion, life continued with its usual precision. Dinner was served exactly at 7. The fireplace crackled softly despite the mild weather. Staff members spoke in lowered voices, careful not to mention the woman who had quietly disappeared from the household only hours earlier. William Castellano remained alone in his study, reviewing contracts that normally demanded his full attention, yet the words seemed unusually difficult to follow. Every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward the worn leather notebook resting on the corner of his desk. He had intended to place it into storage with the rest of Naomi's employment records, but something about her final request lingered in his thoughts. She had not begged to keep her job. She had not defended herself. She had only cared about those pages. Across town, Naomi rented a modest room above an elderly couple's bakery. The apartment measured less than 500 square feet, with faded wallpaper and a single window overlooking a narrow street where delivery trucks arrived before dawn. She carefully unpacked her few belongings into neat stacks, then instinctively reached toward the side pocket of her bag before stopping. The notebook was gone. For the first time all day, uncertainty crossed her face. She quietly sat beside the window, folded her hands, and whispered to herself, "I hope he reads it from the beginning." Back at the estate, William finally stood and walked toward the desk. He picked up the notebook with both hands. The leather cover showed years of careful use. Its edges had softened with time, and faint impressions suggested it had been opened thousands of times. There was no title. No initials. No lock. Only a simple blue ribbon marking a page near the middle. His curiosity urged him to begin there, but something held him back. Instead, he opened the front cover. On the very first page, written in careful handwriting, was a single sentence. Some people only need someone to notice the little things. William frowned. It was not what he expected. He turned the page. The next contained only a date from nearly a year earlier, the week Naomi first arrived at the estate. Beneath it appeared several brief observations, none of which resembled confidential information. There were no names connected to business dealings, no financial records, no family secrets. Only simple notes describing daily moments that most people would never have considered important. A breakfast left untouched. A smile lasting 3 seconds longer than the day before. A favorite song played softly in the hallway. William stopped reading. Why would anyone spend months recording details that seemed almost meaningless? Before he could continue, a knock interrupted the silence. His longtime estate manager stepped inside. "Sir, I wanted to let you know we reviewed the inventory again. Everything appears to be accounted for." William slowly looked up. "Everything?" "Yes, sir. We cannot find anything missing." Another silence settled over the room. The very reason Naomi had fallen under suspicion suddenly seemed far less certain. After the manager left, William looked back at the notebook. The rain tapped gently against the windows as he rested one hand on the next unopened page. For the first time that day, he wondered whether he had dismissed the wrong person before asking the right questions. William remained in his study long after the rest of the estate had settled into its nightly routine. The antique clock on the mantel chimed 9, then 10, yet the notebook never left his hands. He slowly turned another page, expecting at last to find something that justified his suspicion. Instead, each entry raised even more questions. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, recording moments so ordinary that they seemed almost invisible. One note described how a young gardener smiled for the first time after receiving a phone call from his daughter. Another mentioned that the elderly cook skipped lunch whenever she worried about her husband's medical appointments. There were observations about fresh flowers placed near the front entrance, the exact songs played by the pianist during Sunday brunch, and the way the house became quieter whenever rain touched the windows. None of it resembled surveillance. None of it explained why Naomi had guarded the notebook so carefully. William leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He prided himself on reading people accurately. It was one of the reasons his business decisions rarely failed. Yet every page challenged the conclusion he had reached only hours before. He turned another sheet and stopped. At the top of the page appeared a date from 6 months earlier. Beneath it was a sentence written with unusual care. Today he laughed for 12 full seconds without pretending. William frowned. There was no name, only the word he. Below it, another line read, he looked toward the window instead of the floor. Progress is never loud. William searched the page for an explanation but found only more brief observations, each ending with the same quiet optimism. The next page continued in the same pattern. He finished breakfast. He accepted help without pulling away. He remembered the blue bird outside the library. William stared at the entries. Whoever this mysterious person was, Naomi had been paying extraordinary attention to every small improvement. Before he could continue, his phone rang. It was his longtime family physician returning a call about routine appointments. During the conversation, the doctor casually mentioned that William's 12-year-old son, Ethan, had shown slight improvement during his most recent evaluation. Someone has been helping him develop consistent routines, the doctor said. Whatever has changed at home, I would encourage you not to interrupt it. William thanked him and ended the call, but the words echoed through the silent room. He looked down at the notebook again. The dates matched the months Ethan had slowly become calmer. The observations matched habits William himself had barely noticed. His heartbeat slowed as an uncomfortable possibility entered his mind. He carefully flipped through several more pages. Every reference to he'd coincided with days Ethan had spent inside the estate. Every encouraging note aligned with moments William vaguely remembered seeing his son less anxious, more willing to speak, more comfortable sitting beside someone during dinner. A memory surfaced without warning. Weeks earlier, William had walked past the sunroom and briefly seen Naomi sitting several feet away from Ethan while both silently read different books. Neither had spoken. Neither had looked uncomfortable. He had dismissed the moment without another thought. Now it returned with startling clarity. William closed the notebook halfway, his certainty beginning to unravel. If these pages truly documented Ethan's quiet victories rather than the family's secrets, then he had not only misunderstood Naomi. He might have dismissed the one person who had noticed the child everyone else loved deeply but struggled to understand. William had built his reputation on facts rather than assumptions, yet as midnight approached, the facts he believed only hours earlier continued to disappear one by one. He returned to the notebook and carefully turned another page. This time, a folded piece of plain paper slipped onto the desk. It was not a letter or a personal photograph. It was a simple weekly schedule written in Naomi's careful handwriting. Every line centered around Ethan. Monday, encourage him to choose breakfast instead of offering suggestions. Tuesday, wait 10 seconds before repeating a question. Wednesday, open the library curtains before he wakes because morning light helps him stay calm. Thursday, place the blue puzzle near the fireplace because familiar routines reduce anxious moments. Friday, let him finish speaking even if the silence feels uncomfortable. William stared at the page for several seconds. No doctor had ever shared advice this detailed. No specialist had spent enough time inside the estate to notice these tiny patterns. He slowly remembered mornings when Ethan unexpectedly walked into the kitchen without hesitation, afternoons when his son quietly remained at the dinner table a little longer than usual, evenings when the boy no longer rushed away from family conversations after only a few minutes. William had celebrated those small victories without ever asking how they had become possible. He continued reading. The next pages were filled with observations rather than instructions. Today he noticed the sound of rain before anyone else. Today he asked whether the gardener's flowers would bloom again next spring. Today he smiled after hearing the piano instead of covering his ears. Every sentence reflected extraordinary patience. Naomi never claimed responsibility. She never wrote that she had accomplished anything. Instead, every page focused entirely on Ethan's progress, as though his victories mattered more than her own existence. Then William reached another page marked by the blue ribbon that had caught his attention earlier. Across the top, Naomi had written a single sentence that caused him to stop breathing for a moment. Children tell you what they need long before they find the words to explain it. Below that line, she described the afternoon William had remembered from the sunroom. Ethan had not wanted to read the book. He had wanted someone willing to sit beside him without asking questions. Naomi had understood that silence itself could become a conversation when trust was allowed to grow naturally. William closed his eyes. He realized he had walked past that very moment believing nothing important was happening. He had mistaken quiet kindness for ordinary housekeeping. Suddenly another memory returned with painful clarity. 2 months earlier Ethan had refused to attend an important family gathering until Naomi quietly handed him a small blue bookmark. Within minutes, he had calmly entered the room. William had assumed it was coincidence. According to the notebook, it had been part of a carefully developed routine that helped Ethan manage overwhelming situations without fear. William looked toward the empty chair across his desk where Naomi had stood that afternoon. For the first time in many years, certainty gave way to regret. He had judged a woman by what he imagined she might be writing instead of discovering why she had written it. Yet as he reached the final lines on the page, another mystery appeared. Naomi had added one quiet sentence beneath the date. "Someone inside this house is hiding more than I ever could, but until I know the whole truth, I will protect the innocent before exposing the guilty." William slowly lowered the notebook onto the desk. The room became perfectly still once again, but now the silence no longer carried confidence. It carried a question that demanded an answer. Morning arrived beneath a blanket of grey clouds, but the Castelliano estate felt colder than the weather outside. William had barely slept. The notebook remained open on his desk exactly where he had left it, its pages quietly dismantling assumptions that had once seemed unquestionable. Before the household gathered for breakfast, he requested copies of the estate security logs, employment schedules, and maintenance reports from the previous year. He was not searching for evidence against Naomi anymore. He was searching for evidence that explained why she had written her final warning. Hours passed as documents accumulated across the desk. One detail soon emerged. Every unusual incident inside the estate had been followed by a short note in Naomi's notebook, yet none of those notes accused anyone directly. Instead, they described patterns. Deliveries arriving several minutes earlier than scheduled. A storage room left unlocked without explanation. Employees appearing unusually nervous after private conversations in the service hallway. Naomi never recorded conclusions. She only documented observations, almost as though she understood that truth required patience before judgment. William compared the dates in the notebook with official records. Every observation proved accurate. Not exaggerated. Not emotional. Simply factual. He slowly realized that while everyone else had been reacting to isolated events, Naomi had quietly been noticing connections hidden beneath ordinary routines. Another page caught his attention. It listed several names belonging to members of the household staff. His heartbeat quickened for a brief moment, fearing this might finally resemble the confidential records he had imagined. Instead, beside each name appeared something entirely different. Mrs. Alvarez. Sending half her paycheck to support her sister recovering from surgery in Arizona. Daniel, the groundskeeper. Working double shifts to help his son attend community college. Linda, the pastry chef. Secretly studying at night to earn her teaching certificate. Naomi had not collected weaknesses to use against people. She had remembered burdens they never spoke about aloud. At the bottom of the page she had written, "When people feel seen, they carry heavy things with greater courage." William lowered the notebook into his lap. He had employed hundreds of people over the years, yet he could not have described their private struggles with such compassion. Naomi had accomplished something remarkable without authority, wealth, or recognition. She had simply paid attention. As the afternoon sun briefly pushed through the clouds, another folded note slipped from between 2 pages. Unlike the others, this one contained no observations at all. It was a rough sketch of the estate with several rooms lightly marked in pencil. One hallway near the archives had been circled twice. Beside it, Naomi had written only a single sentence. "Someone keeps entering after everyone else has gone to sleep, but I still do not know why." William immediately called the estate manager and requested access records for that hallway. The response came quickly. No official employee had been authorized to enter the archives during the late hours Naomi had recorded. The explanation made no sense. The notebook was no longer revealing small acts of kindness alone. It was quietly pointing toward a mystery that had existed inside his own home while he remained completely unaware. William closed the cover with unusual care. The woman he had dismissed had never tried to expose anyone without certainty. She had chosen restraint over accusation, truth over assumption, and patience over recognition. Standing alone beside the library window, William finally admitted something he had never expected to say, even if only to himself. He had mistaken quiet wisdom for ordinary silence, and now the only person capable of explaining the notebook was no longer under his roof. William spent the rest of the afternoon following every quiet trail Naomi had left behind. The notebook no longer felt like a collection of private thoughts. It felt like a map drawn by someone who believed that the smallest details often revealed the greatest truths. He requested copies of archived visitor logs, maintenance requests, and camera reports from the hallway Naomi had circled. Nothing appeared unusual when viewed separately, yet together they formed an unmistakable pattern. Several late evening entries had been signed by different employees, but the handwriting looked remarkably similar. Deliveries had occasionally been redirected through the archive corridor even though no deliveries were scheduled after sunset. Storage inventories had been corrected the following morning without anyone reporting an error. Every inconsistency was minor enough to escape notice, but Naomi had quietly recognized that they all pointed toward the same place. She had written one sentence beneath the final observation. "Patterns speak long before people do." William folded the page and looked toward the rain-soaked gardens outside the library windows. He realized Naomi had never confronted anyone because she understood the danger of reaching conclusions without complete evidence. She had chosen patience over certainty, even when remaining silent cost her peace of mind. Determined to learn more about the woman he had so quickly dismissed, William contacted the employment agency that had recommended her nearly a year earlier. The director answered with genuine surprise after hearing Naomi's name. "You did not know about her previous work?" she asked gently. William admitted that he did not. The answer that followed left the room completely still. Before becoming a housekeeper, Naomi had spent several years working as an assistant in a program supporting children with developmental differences. She had been known for carefully documenting behavioral patterns, emotional triggers, and daily progress so families could better understand their children. Her supervisors described her as extraordinarily observant, someone who noticed improvements too subtle for most people to recognize. She had left that career only because her mother became seriously ill, forcing Naomi to seek steadier income and flexible hours. She had never stopped carrying the same notebook. She had simply filled it with new lives, new people, and new opportunities to quietly help others. William ended the call without speaking for several moments. Suddenly every page made sense. Naomi had not been watching the household out of curiosity. Observation was how she cared for people. It was the language through which she expressed compassion. She recorded details because forgotten details often became forgotten people. He reopened the notebook and carefully turned to one of the last pages. There he found another message written in smaller letters than the rest. "If I ever leave before finishing this work, I hope someone else will notice what Ethan is trying so hard to show the world." William read the sentence again, slower this time. Not once had Naomi asked for recognition. Not once had she written about sacrifices she had made. Every page centered on helping someone else feel understood. Yet beneath that message rested one final observation that drew his attention immediately. The person changing the records believes no one notices small inconsistencies. They are wrong. Truth grows quietly, but it always grows. William slowly closed the notebook and rested one hand upon its worn cover. His regret had already become undeniable, but another realization now stood beside it. Naomi had left without defending herself because she trusted that truth did not need louder voices. It only needed enough time for someone willing to see it. The following morning, William cancelled every meeting on his calendar for the first time in years. Contracts, financial reports, and business negotiations suddenly felt insignificant beside a single unanswered question. Where was Naomi Carter? The employment agency confirmed that she had declined every offer of legal assistance after losing her position. She had accepted temporary work at a neighborhood bakery while caring for her recovering mother. She had left without speaking negatively about the Castellano family. She had not challenged the decision. She had not tried to defend her reputation. When the agency director was asked whether Naomi had ever complained about her dismissal, the answer came quietly. She only said she hoped Ethan would continue making progress. William thanked her and slowly ended the call. Not once had Naomi mentioned herself. Every concern she carried still centered on a boy who was no longer her responsibility. Later that afternoon, William walked through the estate with a notebook in his hands, retracing the places Naomi had described so carefully. He stopped beside the library windows where Ethan often watched birds gather near the old maple tree. He stood outside the greenhouse where she had written that flowers sometimes encouraged conversations better than direct questions. He paused in the music room where she had observed that familiar melodies reduced Ethan's anxiety after difficult mornings. Everywhere he looked, ordinary spaces suddenly held extraordinary meaning. They were not simply rooms inside a mansion. They were places where someone had quietly invested patience that no one else had noticed. As he approached the sunroom, he found Ethan sitting alone with a closed book resting on his lap. The 12-year-old looked toward the empty chair beside him before asking a question so softly that William almost missed it. "Is Miss Naomi coming back?" William hesitated. He had always believed honesty mattered, yet no truthful answer felt complete. "I do not know yet," he admitted. Ethan lowered his eyes. "She always knew when I wanted silence instead of talking." William sat beside his son without speaking. After several minutes, Ethan quietly added, "She said people do not always need fixing. Sometimes they only need someone willing to stay." The sentence struck William with unexpected force because it sounded exactly like something Naomi would have written. He realized her kindness had never been dramatic enough to attract attention. It had lived inside ordinary moments that most people walked past without noticing. That evening, William returned once more to the final pages of the notebook. Tucked carefully inside the back cover was a folded receipt from a small bookstore across town. On the reverse side, Naomi had written only an address and a date scheduled for the following Saturday morning. There were no explanations. Only one additional sentence appeared beneath the address. "If I cannot finish what I started, perhaps someone else finally will." William immediately recognized the neighborhood. It was only a few blocks from the bakery where Naomi was now working. He slipped the receipt back into the notebook with unusual care. For days he had searched through pages trying to understand the woman he had judged. Now he understood that reading her words would never be enough. Some truths could only be discovered face to face. As evening settled over the estate, William placed the notebook inside his coat instead of locking it away. This time he was not carrying evidence. He was carrying an apology that had arrived far too late, along with the quiet hope that dignity, once overlooked, might still be honored before the final page of Naomi's story had been written. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and cool autumn air as William drove alone across the city, the worn notebook resting on the passenger seat beside him. The address Naomi had written led not to an office or a private residence, but to a modest community learning center attached to a neighborhood bookstore. Families gathered outside with children carrying backpacks, puzzles, and sketchbooks. Volunteers greeted each child by name. The atmosphere was calm, welcoming, and surprisingly familiar. William stepped inside and immediately noticed shelves filled with educational games, quiet reading corners, and tables where children worked patiently alongside adults. On one wall hung dozens of handwritten notes thanking volunteers for changing lives through simple acts of kindness. A receptionist smiled warmly and recognized the notebook in William's hands before she recognized him. "You must know Naomi," she said. William paused before quietly admitting, "I am hoping to understand her." The receptionist nodded with gentle understanding. "Then you came to the right place." She explained that every Saturday Naomi volunteered several hours without accepting payment. She helped children who struggled with communication, anxiety, or changes in routine. She listened more than she spoke. Parents often said she noticed improvements that trained professionals overlooked because she never rushed children to become someone else. She simply helped them become more comfortable being themselves. William listened in complete silence. Everything matched the notebook. Every page had been an extension of the life Naomi had quietly lived long before entering the Castellano estate. As he looked around the room, he noticed Ethan's favorite style of puzzles neatly stacked on one shelf, the same blue bookmarks Naomi had once carried, and identical observation journals resting beside a reading table. The methods she had used with Ethan had not been inventions. They were gifts developed through years of patient service. Moments later, the receptionist pointed toward a classroom where Naomi sat beside a young girl assembling a picture puzzle. Naomi never touched a single piece herself. She simply waited, smiled gently, and encouraged the child to continue whenever confidence faded. When the final piece slipped into place, the girl's face brightened with quiet pride. Naomi celebrated the child's success with the same calm joy William had read throughout the notebook. There was no performance. No desire for recognition. Only genuine happiness for someone else's achievement. William remained standing in the hallway, unwilling to interrupt. For the first time he fully understood why Ethan had trusted her. She never tried to control people. She made them feel safe enough to discover their own strength. As the session ended and families slowly departed, Naomi gathered the journals left on the table. She looked up and froze when she saw William standing a few feet away holding the familiar notebook. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence between them carried far more honesty than any prepared explanation could offer. William stepped forward and carefully extended the notebook with both hands. "I finally read every page," he said quietly. Naomi accepted it without anger or triumph. She simply rested one hand on its worn cover as though greeting an old friend. William lowered his eyes before continuing. "I believed I understood people because I could judge quickly. Your notebook proved that understanding begins only after judgment ends." Naomi remained silent for another moment before answering with gentle sincerity. The notebook never existed to prove anyone wrong. It only existed so that the right people would not be forgotten. Those simple words carried more weight than every business lesson William had learned throughout his career, and in that quiet community classroom, surrounded by ordinary families and extraordinary kindness, he realized that the strongest person in the room had never been the one with the greatest power. In the weeks that followed, change arrived quietly, just as Naomi had always believed meaningful change should. William returned to the Castellano estate carrying far more than the notebook. He carried a different way of seeing the people who walked through his home every day. Instead of beginning each morning with reports and schedules, he began by speaking with the staff whose names he had once known only from employment records. He learned about families, dreams, hardships, and hopes that had existed all along without his notice. One by one, the quiet observations Naomi had written became conversations that restored trust throughout the household. The review of estate records also reached its conclusion. By patiently comparing months of reports exactly as Naomi had done, William uncovered a series of administrative errors created by one outside contractor responsible for inventory documentation. The discrepancies were resolved through a formal audit, procedures were strengthened, and every affected employee was cleared of unnecessary suspicion. Naomi had been right. Truth had not required accusations. It had required patience, careful observation, and the courage to wait until every fact could speak for itself. Several days later, William invited the entire household to gather in the library. The room where Naomi had once lost her position now held a very different purpose. Standing before the staff, William admitted that he had judged before understanding and had confused authority with wisdom. He did not hide behind excuses or blame circumstances. He accepted responsibility for the decision that had hurt someone who deserved gratitude instead of suspicion. Then, in front of every employee, he invited Naomi to stand beside him. She accepted only after quietly asking whether Ethan would be attending. When the boy entered the room carrying the familiar blue bookmark, he walked directly toward Naomi with a smile that required no explanation. The silence that followed carried more emotion than applause ever could. William offered Naomi her position back, along with a promotion that would allow her to help develop employee wellness and family support programs throughout the estate. Naomi listened respectfully before answering with the same humility that had filled every page of her notebook. She agreed to return only if every member of the household would be treated with the same dignity, regardless of title or position. William accepted without hesitation. From that day forward, the notebook remained in the library inside a simple glass case, not as a trophy but as a reminder. Its worn pages had never contained secrets powerful enough to destroy lives. They had contained compassion powerful enough to change them. Ethan continued making steady progress, encouraged not only by Naomi but by a father who had finally learned to notice the quiet victories unfolding in front of him every day. Employees who once felt invisible discovered that being seen could restore confidence as surely as any promotion. Visitors noticed that the Castellano estate felt different, although few could explain why. The answer existed in countless ordinary moments where people paused long enough to listen before judging, to observe before speaking, and to understand before deciding. Years later, whenever someone asked William about the greatest lesson of his life, he never mentioned business success or personal influence. He simply smiled, looked toward the old notebook resting peacefully on its shelf, and remembered the woman who had taught him that the strongest form of leadership begins with the willingness to truly see another human being. And on that quiet journey from assumption to understanding, everyone who witnessed it remembered what dignity truly looked like.